Captain, the evil space shrimp has constructed a giant chainsaw spaceship. He's planning to cut the sun in half.
A chainsaw spaceship? How does he fly it?
He controls it with his mind, sir.
Of course. But why would the evil space shrimp cut the sun in half?
With the sun gone, he'll be able to keep his nightclub open 24 hours a day.
Sounds like a job for astronaut dolphin detective.
Welcome to Glowburn, a podcast dedicated to the Mutant Crawl Classics role-playing game.
Welcome to Glowburn, a podcast about the Mutant Crawl Classics role-playing game and old-school post-apocalyptic adventuring. I'm Judge Forrest.
I'm Judge James.
And for the central topic of our show, a section we call the Great Disaster, we will be investigating the post-apocalypse with our mystery guest,
Judge Bob.
Woo! Okay, guys, well, let's first head down into the shelter.
Down in the shelter.
All right, so we're all in the shelter, and in the down in the shelter sections when we talk about what we've done in gaming recently. So let's start with you, Forrest. So, Judge Forrest, what have you been doing?
All right, well, as you know, I have my weekly game of 2nd edition AD&D. The party is now exploring the Stygian Gardens of Abelia Prem. And if you haven't seen that or read that adventure, I would suggest picking it up. It is actually quite good. I've had to jack it up a few levels because it's a low-level adventure, and of course my adventures are getting around 8th, 9th level. So we have to make the baddies even badder, which I enjoy. Also interesting this last week, we didn't have anybody die, but the party's... well, no, it's actually kind of better than that. The party's elven thief discovered that she doesn't like acid-spewing gargoyles. She lost her armor, she lost 2 magic rings, and a bunch of other mundane items because of the acid spewing gargoyle. So the lesson is don't do acid, kids. Anyway, I thought it was actually better than having a party member die. You know, you spray them with acid, they lose their stuff. Okay, all right, I'm a jerk, I admit it.
That is cruel.
She just kept failing her saves. I mean, she was rolling terribly. So, yep, DM's revenge, I guess. A couple weeks ago, before that, we had OdysseyCon here in Madison. It's a small science fiction convention, and they've been trying to up the profile of the gaming section. And as part of that, we had 2 distinguished visitors here. I got to play in 2 games on Saturday. Daniel Bishop judged The Imperishable Sorceress, which he wrote.
Oh, nice.
Uh-huh. That one ended in a TPK. Just when we thought we were about to win Dungeon Crawl Classics, like win the entire game, Brendan LaSalle's character, who was holding onto the chain of the rest of the party, who was dangling over the side of the mountain, got hit with a stinger from some female, like they were bees with the faces of women, and he fell asleep. And so if you're holding the party dangling over the side of a mountain and you fall asleep, that does bad things. So that was a TPK. And then later, Brendan judged his adventure, You Will Know Us by the Trail of the Dead. And the title, you know, I'm still, well, no, I know how the title fits into the adventure, but it's tentatively and loosely tied to the adventure. So the adventure was basically, we were a rock band, and we did this kind of rock star journey through alternate dimensions, and it was really phantasmagoric and weird and a lot of fun. A lot of fun. Speaking of bad rolls, Judge Brennan could not roll for the life of him. He rolled terribly, and so we pretty much wiped that adventure clean pretty quickly, I think. So the party literally rocked the world. Outside of that, writing-wise, I'm wrapping up finally my super secret RPG project, at least the first draft. I'm hoping to be done with that and have it submitted by the time this show drops, probably. And I also did some editing on the Gong Farmer's Almanac, a very little bit, and I just didn't have time to do any writing for it, so I'll have to try again next year for the writing, but got to help edit that a little bit. Mostly the reason for the pinch on time is the work I've been doing on Killer of Giants, which is coming along nicely. And once my super secret project is finished and finally touched up, then I can really dive, full bore into Killer of Giants and get that whipped into shape. So that's what I've been up to. What about you, Judge James?
Well, I've been pretty busy the last few days with the gaming front. So I have my regular Numenera game, which I think I discussed in the last Glowburn episode, how I was getting tired of just kind of having it running around in the ninth world of Numenera. So I sent them all back to 1879 Colorado. So that's been interesting. It's like, is it a time traveling game? Which I guess it is. Is it far future? Is it post-apocalypse? It's pretty much everything now. It's a kitchen sink campaign. It's starting, I actually am starting to feel like Crawling Under a Broken Moon, having played as much of that as I have, is affecting everything, where I just kitchen sink pretty much every campaign I run.
It kind of does that.
It's infectious.
It is.
On the other end, so last Friday we continued. I had this Friday family game night thing going on, and we're delving through The Chain Coffin, by Michael Curtis. And we did Sour Spring Hollow as the funnel. We did Moonricket Bridge on Easter with the kiddos. And we're now doing Doom of the Savage Kings, but with a Shutter Mountain twist.
Mm-hmm.
And I initially was going to do that fairly straight Shudfolky. And then I dabbled in some Vikings with Doom of the Savage King, with some Viking travelers or raiders that have a village in the Shutter Mountains. And then we had a new player join last week.
Oh, cool.
And when I went to give him 3 0-level characters, I just gave him Crawling Under a Broken Moon characters. And said, well, your characters are from a place called the World of Tomorrow. So at this point, I don't know if the campaign's post-apocalyptic or, like I said, I'm just doing this to everything.
Doesn't every campaign eventually end up being post-apocalyptic? I mean,
if the players play the game right, yeah, there should be apocalypse in their wake.
Right.
What threw us off last week was some of the gear that's in the equipment list. If you call Under a Broken Moon, your equipment list is pretty interesting. Mm-hmm. And a couple of these 0 levels start out with some random stuff. So one PC of my friends had a Dutch oven, and the other had a pocket fisherman. And both were very controversial because a few of us knew what a Dutch oven was, and no one knew what a pocket fisherman was. My wife, in the first time, no idea. So the first time I've ever seen a Dutch oven as a game prop, my wife had to bring our Dutch oven to the table. And we were discussing rolling dice in it potentially as a dice tray. We didn't.
That's a big one.
I haven't seasoned it yet. And the other thing we did was we really didn't know what a pocket fisherman was. And it was we were trying to suss, was it either some kind of fishing tool that fit in your pocket, or was it like an action figure size fisherman? And given that it's Crawling Under a Broken Moon, we went for plan B, named him Alejandro, and if my friend Frank's characters all die, it'll be his next character in line.
That's awesome.
I actually really feel like the Shutter Mountains kind of fit pretty well as one of those, maybe in the spirit of Metamorphosis Alpha, as a place where there's a post-apocalypse, but no one knows it's a post-apocalypse because you're kind of isolated. Uh-huh. So we might be going down that path more.
That could be fun.
And the only other thing was and this has nothing to do with DCC or MCC, but I played Lamentations of the Flame Princess for the first time on Saturday.
Yay!
And that was interesting. It was fun.
That's a great system. You didn't play that with your family, I hope, with your children.
No, but I've said this repeated times. I actually believe that the rules for that system, if leveraged out without the art, would be like the perfect kids game.
I agree.
It's got all the right pieces of the old school games without a lot of complicated tables and stuff that I can see my daughters having an easy time running it without problem.
I think Lamentations sometimes gets a bad rep because of the artwork. It's very adult, but you're right. The system is really stripped down and very lean, and I like that aspect of it. So I totally see what you're saying.
Well, when I say, just to be clear, any Lamentation fans, when I say like stripping the art out, it's not to I think the art's actually very good and very interesting and weird and disturbing, but it might be a touch too weird for my 10-year-old to look at. So
that might not even be legal.
Just a touch.
Yeah.
So, Bob, what have you been playing?
Well, I run a regular first edition game on Wednesday nights, so we just played last night, as a matter of fact. I've been keeping track of how many deaths there have been in the campaign, and there's been 83 character deaths so far.
Wow.
Well, it's AD&D.
Yeah.
People get resurrected. People do come back from the dead. So I average about a death every 1.7 games, as it stands right now. And last night, I had a near miss, just like Forrest did. The very first thing in the game they found, they're currently running through an adventure out of an old Dragon magazine. They're in Queen of the Demon Web pits, and you get to the 4th level, and there's all these membranes that open into strange, pretty much unfleshed out worlds. And so I've been dropping modules in. In this adventure, their first thing they find last night, they're in a temple, they find all of these robes, and there's one robe that looks different. And if you're lawful evil, that's great. If you're not, it's a cloak of poisonousness. And the character that decided, hey, I'm going to put this on, is gotten pretty reckless because he has a ring of regeneration and a periapt of protection from poison, which gave him the 20% saving throw that he needed to not be struck stone dead.
Wow.
And he rolled a 19.
Nice.
Wow.
Yeah. So there was that. Fridays, we've been playing the Star Wars role-playing game. And Sundays, we're currently playing Rogue Trader. And that's a lot of fun. If you think about it, it's Civilization post-apocalypse, really, where everything is so run down and confused. So that's what's...
Which Star Wars game are you playing?
We're running the...
Fantasy Flight?
Yeah.
Okay, so like Edge of the Empire, Age of Rebellion?
Yeah, and our table is a mixture of characters from the different source books. So, of course, the guy running the game is pulling his hair out faster than one normally would if sticking with one core book. So that's been going on. I was given a brief extension for the Gong Farmer's Almanac, so I've got to get my stuff in real quick. And of course, reading for Sanctum and stuff like that, and working on a couple super secret projects of my own.
Excellent.
As well as the Someday There Will Be Skull and Crossbones classics. I will eventually finish my Pirate DCC skin.
Oh, very cool.
Oh, you're doing that?
Yes, I actually...
Oh my god, that's awesome.
Last year we had a playtest. I had created 3 of the new character classes for it, and so I ran an adventure at our local game shop to test those out and see how they worked and make sure that if I dropped those in with regular DCC characters that things weren't incredibly skewed one way or the other, and they all fit together really nicely. So the idea I've got is much like Michael Curtis says about Lankmar, there's different layers to it. You can run just a straight-out fantasy pirate game. You can run something that has hints of the paranormal and hints of fantasy, or you can run it as a strictly based historical game. So that is kind of my side passion project right now, and that's going to take a while.
You know, Bob, if you want, my co-DM for my 2E session has his PhD in history, and he did his dissertation on piracy in the Indian Ocean in the 1600s.
What's his name?
Cisco Bradley is his name. Francis Bradley.
I don't know him, actually. I know a number of people with PhDs that have covered that subject that live in the Midwest.
Yeah.
So
well, he's living in New York. He's from Wisconsin. He's living in New York. So if you want contact, talk to me.
I'll certainly keep that in mind. I've got a pirate research library here at the house of about 400 volumes.
Oh, boy.
So yeah, it's kind of been my thing for a while. And more resources are always good. I'll keep that in mind. I'll touch base with you after the show.
Great.
While we're pitching Bob to get all over this idea, just so if you need play testers, we're especially qualified in my house here. My wife and kiddos and I, we are I think one of the only families. We actually ran an RPG across from Pirates of the Caribbean in Disney World just to do it. So a couple of years ago, we broke out the dice, and there's a little seating area. Whenever they call that area, and it was like for my blog
The Tortuga
post.
Tavern, yeah.
There you go. There you go. We were over there running No Thank You Evil with the kids, and a couple onlookers, a couple weird looks.
That's awesome.
But, I think that makes us especially trained.
That is beyond awesome. That is totally beyond awesome.
That makes me want to run MCC in Chernobyl.
Oh, well, you really need to run Stalker in Chernobyl.
That's true.
Run MCC in Epcot.
I ran MCC when I was at Disney last, but I did it in the resort. There's no section of Disney that really matches the post-apocalypse.
No.
Unless you submerge it in water, which is what we did. We had like a little bit of a hex crawl where I said it was Disney World under 50 feet of water, like Water World. That movie with Kevin Costner.
Yep.
Epic.
Ranks right up there with Beyond Thunderdome.
I'm being serious. I think it's fantastic. Oh, yeah.
I thought it was the best Submariner movie ever made.
There you go.
All right.
Voices of the Ancient Ones.
Welcome to the Voices of the Ancient Ones. You'll find our contact information at the end of the show if you'd like to reach out and submit show or segment ideas or ask questions about the game. Feel free to share with us what weird post-apocalyptic science fantasy world you're tromping through right now. If you find that esoteric mutant book, movie, or comic out there, mention that to us too. Now, while the emails from the Ancient Ones have been silent, we've had some interesting posts on the Google Plus community, Glowburn community lately. We appreciate all of your posts and comments. And one that drew my attention in particular was a post by Andy Action, who outlined the materials he is currently using to run Mutant Crawl Classics. He's created a judge's binder and a player's binder with material from Crawling Under a Broken Moon, the Kickstarter preview of the American Survival Guide, Metal Gods of Ur-Haddad, Crawljammer, Hubris, and Tales of the Fallen Empire. And I'm doing a very similar thing, so I was very interested to see that out there on the community. We'd like to know what you're doing while you're waiting for the full rule set to deliver. And what is it that you most look forward to when the rules drop? We'd really like to hear what you're expecting out of Mutant Crawl Classics when it comes out. And let's also let it be known that we will have a very special guest on the show just before Gen Con, and I'll bet you can't guess who it is. Maybe you can. So Judge James, what else has been happening in Google Plus land?
All right, we got some great questions here. So let's start with Mark Plord. Mark asks, "Greetings, Glowburners. We don't yet know how much about archaic alignments, but they seem to indicate loyalty to a group, be it your clan or a brotherhood or the like. How do you think this will change not only the way characters interact, but how adventures and campaigns will take form? For example, if all the characters are seekers for the clan of the Cog." Good question.
It's a really good question. I think it's a multi-layered question.
I'm sure.
Because it depends on if you're going to have a party consisting of one archaic alignment, that makes things pretty easy, right? In my gaming experience, the most interesting campaigns have been ones where you've had a couple of different interest groups, if you will, in the party. And even with a third or fourth or even fifth different interest of other parties encountering the player characters. And I think, this adds a lot of complexity to the game. I think it makes it really rich. You're not just going for your standard, quote-unquote, standard alignment, everybody trying to act lawful good, or, what do you do with the evil character in the party who wants to kill everybody because he's chaotic evil? It kind of frees you from that, I think. I don't know, what do you think, James?
Well, I guess I equate it back a bit to, I'm going to go into my video game memory here and go back to the old Fallout 2 game. I don't know how old that is, 1999, 2000, something like that, 2001. And where you start out in Fallout 2, you're like a villager in you have a spear, you're fighting rad scorpions, and you have to take a test. And then from there you go out into the wastes and you meet folks from different cities and communities, and some of them you can become part of your party. And I could see that being how a Mutant Crawl Classics campaign starts out. Maybe everyone starts out with Clan of Cog or whatever the archaic alignment is, and the starting characters all have that base archaic alignment. But as players die, especially if you're in, I guess if Judge Bob runs a game and 83 characters die and you have to replace them with other characters, they're not going to be of the same archaic alignment, and that should add, some story elements and all sorts of stuff, and it'll start to make a much more diverse adventuring party. So I think, especially groups that want to play that up, If you have a archaic alignment that matches up, closely to, having more tech and being more tech savvy, or one that's, more shamanistic and savage, making some interesting role playing.
I'm also reminded of a conversation I had with Jim Wampler about this. This would have been a year and a half, 2 years ago. And he strongly implied that the reason that you have archaic alignments and not your regular, good, evil, law, chaos alignment structure is that the name of the game is survival, right? People want to survive. And so these archaic alignments are kind of a survival mechanism. And thinking about human beings and how we operate, sometimes we modify our ideologies, we modify who we hang out with in the name of, fitting in, or in this case, it would be really of survival. So I think it's nice because it allows for some complexity in the characters. They may be a part of an archaic alignment, but they may not be strictly beholden to all the tenets of that. And as time goes on, they may change the way that they view things because they're just trying to survive.
I'm totally with you there. When you look at the archaic alignments, I always kind of consider them as, what gang are you from, or what religion do you follow? Because that's sort of how they break down their philosophies more than I'm good or I'm evil. And so if you're looking at, Mad Max, well, there's certainly various groups there that follow very different paths. Doesn't matter that everybody in the movie is human. You can certainly see archaic alignments in action right there. And I think that mixing archaic alignments within a party can lead to some really great storytelling and some great role-playing opportunities. But depending on the alignments, you probably also want to make sure you really know your table well, because there's always that one guy that shows up at a table and wants to play chaotic evil just so he can screw over and kill everybody and nobody has fun but him. And so you certainly want to be careful not to misstep there. But other than that, I think that the opportunity for growth with the characters, following that path of, this is what I believe, but I'm traveling with these people and I've seen something new. I've been opened up to new experiences and new philosophies. That's a great path for a player to be able to explore with their character.
Right. When you throw a party into a foxhole and suddenly they become friends, all those differences dissolve pretty quickly.
It's like when Max teams up with the kids in Thunderdome against, Tina Turner.
Yeah, because everybody's against Tina Turner. That's why. But yeah.
All right, cool. Well, Mark, that's a great question. All right, next question. John Hammersley asks, tools for online play. What works well and what doesn't? Do either of you guys play any online games?
Yes.
Wow. I really don't. I've only played online once or twice. I must recuse myself.
I do, and once or twice a week I do.
Same here.
Using Google Hangouts exclusively at this point.
Yeah, I'm in the same bag. When I started out, this was back in 2009, and I think it was a little harder to find virtual tabletops back there that worked well. I was using Skype and a program called MapTool.
Uh-huh.
And now I'm really lazy, and I just use G+ Hangouts and occasionally Skype. I have dabbled with Roll20 as part of I was a player in a Star Wars Age of Rebellion campaign for a short stint. And I can't GM that way. I feel like there's too many bells and whistles to play with.
Yeah. So
when I GM on G+ Hangouts or Skype, I just screen share stuff.
Right.
Or use my daughter's stylus and drawing pad, and I'll just draw pictures on MS Paint.
Yep.
To show people where things are. So I'm really lazy.
Me too. And I'm also in the game that Doug Kovacs typically runs on Saturday mornings, and he uses a program called Twiddler. Twiddler. Yeah. And because he is a consummate artist, it's really cool because we get to see him make art on the fly. And if you have the talent for it, that's helpful. I've looked at Roll20, and I'll be honest, I'm lazy too. I look at all the possibilities and all the prep time that I could put into Roll20, and I just don't want to. Some people do, and that's great. More power to you. That's just not my bag, baby.
I'm going to plug a little bit for my favorite adventures to run online, and I'm about at the end of running through all of John Marr, Purple Sorcerer, all of his Sunken City adventures. And the Sunken City Omnibus is such a fantastic, especially the PDF. I have the PDF in the hard copy, but it's a fantastic resource for running online games if you're not used to it. Because with G Plus Hangouts and just screen share, there's like a 60 or 90 page PDF he gives you if you get the game, if you order the game on DriveThruRPG, where it's just a bunch of maps, and you can so easily screen share those maps and zoom in and just like move the players around the map with just the zoom function in the mouse. And if you're looking for something to try online and you don't want to, you're intimidated by Roll20, or maybe you're not used to running online games, I can't talk up John's Sunken City stuff enough. Very cool. All right, cool. Well, John, thanks for that question. We're going to move on to our last question here, and this is from Robinson. And Robinson asks, is the apocalyptic event that precedes the MCC environment specified in the core book? If not, what advice does the Glowburn crew have on handling this aspect of the game world? For example, plague, nuclear holocaust, environmental disaster, rise of the artificial intelligence, meteor strike, alien invasion, etc., could all lend a significant flavor to the resulting fiction. That said, should the reason for the previous civilization's collapse be left unknown, shrouded in myth and mystery, perhaps allowing the PCs to discover over the course of the campaign? Cheery comments about the end of civilization as we know it and its potential as a narrative springboard, please. Well, I will say that anything we say right now is obvious conjecture, although I want to think that from what I've read from the preview and some of the Kickstarter comments and things like that, and the bits we've gotten from Judge Jim, I want to think that for the most part, it sounds like Mutant Core Classics is going to be so far in the future. The base for it, kind of the expected playstyle, is far enough in the future that maybe campaign or players won't know how it started, and the GM will have their choice of how they wanted to pick their, as we called it before, their own perfect post-apocalypse.
Yes,
Does that sound right?
That is correct. I mean, in talking with Jim, because I asked him that specific question a ways back, and yeah, he's leaving it vague on purpose, and precisely so you do get that sense of deep time that this happened so long ago, nobody knows what happened, nobody remembers what happened. The thing is that I like, though, is that allows the judge to kind of have their own flavor of disaster that preceded was the apocalypse, and I like the freedom that gives. Actually, that makes it a more of a sandboxy feel in terms of the creation of the campaign that you want to run, or even in the specific adventures, And who's to say that it all was due to one thing? You may have had a nuclear accident somewhere. You may have had a plague in another place at a similar time. It could have been any number of things that happened, that perfect storm, if you will.
Yeah. See, I'm kind of an all of the above sort of guy.
Yeah.
I like the idea of a butterfly effect.
Yes.
There was a super flu outbreak in a small community in France, and from there things just rippled, and because of that there was nuclear explosions, and something about the radiation caused AIs to become self-aware, and then as all that was going on, aliens were then drawn to the earth because they saw all this. You could throw it all in there.
Yep.
And players could discover it layer after layer as they try to discover what happened in the past.
Right, and area by area too. I can see that there would be some areas, of course, where a nuclear weapon went off and that has a certain effect. Another area where it was a disease that wiped out the population, that would have a different effect on the players. I mean, you can really. It really makes for like a post-apocalyptic planescape for those who've played second edition. You've got it's almost like the different planes of existence based on different apocalypses, apocalypti, or however you say it.
Well, and one big disaster has a lot of ripple effects. I mean,
Yes.
Just a lot of people dying for any reason is going to cause a spread of disease, and that disease is going to cause additional issues, and it allows you as someone running the game to say, okay, well, this area is heavily irradiated, but this area is not.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't World War X that took out the planet. It was a number of factors, and you can have fun with it. And you can thus be consistent without appearing to be consistent on the surface.
Well, I think also that it allows you to look at various levels of societal degradation. So, you have a nuclear holocaust, that's going to bring things down pretty quickly. But with, a disease, civilization may not collapse as quickly, which might leave different levels of technology available, different levels of knowledge available in different areas.
I was going to say that's a very common post-apocalyptic story trope as well. You've got the people that build the gigantically long, strange, metal-looking RV ark that they send out, and they encounter all sorts of different tribes and levels of things.
Yes. Now, James won't understand what that's about, I don't think. Do you get that reference, James?
Are you talking about like a long arc you're driving around? Is what you're talking about?
Yeah. Do you know the TV show that we're referring to?
Long thing.
No.
That
Okay.
Partridge Family?
No. It was about the same time.
Well, some would argue that might have been the apocalypse. Might have been the Partridge Family.
It was a show, a Saturday morning show called Arc 2, actually.
No.
Okay, all right, yeah. Go to YouTube and look up Arc 2 sometime. And well, I would say enjoy, but tolerate it.
For the time, it wasn't bad.
No, for the time, it was good.
The last time I took one of your recommendations, I ended up with Wizards last time. But
I think the headache was from all the psychic energy that people who actually like the show were expending at you.
I'm sure that's what it is. That's what it was. The only thing I want to add to this is I think that with just about any game that you run, even though the game may be, sort of have the flavor off the bat for having far future, if you're going to run it sooner in the future, the only thing I would suggest is you might want to come up with alternate reasons for some of the classes to exist. For instance, Plantians are, trees that have evolved, maybe very quickly into being living sentient creatures. If you're doing a game that's only 50 years in the future, maybe like a Fallout, more along those lines, or Mad Max, you might want to think about why are those in the game, or should they be in the game? If it's an alien invasion, maybe they're the alien. They're the ones left over. It was alien plants that took over. Or maybe Manimals were out of some kind of island of Dr. Moreau lab, and that's where they came out of. I think that was just D20 Modern or D20 Future had a race called Moreaus, and Moreaus had that Manimal look to them without being super far in the future. So the only suggestion I have, if you would want to play a game where those who've been through the apocalypse might still live, or have a recorded history of that, it's only maybe 50, 100, 200 years in the future, it's just you may want to figure out what you're doing with some of these classes that do have more of a fit for far future. There's definitely room for them. You just might need to rethink their origin.
Very good. Yeah, very, very true. All right, with that, should we move on to the Great Disaster?
Let's go.
The Great Disaster.
Go, 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 go!
All right, well, welcome to the Great Disaster. And for today's topic, we'll be discussing investigative gaming in the post-apocalyptic setting. So, as we said previously, we are joined tonight by the amazing judge and shaman of intros, outros, and bumpers, Bob the Voice Brinkman. Thank you so much for coming on, Bob.
Hey, guys. Sure thing.
Did you go by the Voice Bob Brinkman, or is that like just something for us here?
That is something totally for you. But I like the sound of it. Bob the Voice Brinkman. It might catch on.
I coined that. I will claim that one. I coined that one. I'm pretty proud of that.
Doesn't he get to claim it? He gets to claim it, though.
That'll be my secret Glowburn name.
He is the voice. I just gave him the title. That's all. I crowned him. He gets to be king.
We'll make him a badge.
No, Kirby is king.
All right, so Bob, why don't you give us a little bit of history about your gaming experience with Dungeon Crawl Classics and your particular fascination and interest in investigative games?
Let me start with Dungeon Crawl Classics because I love the story of how Jen and I got involved with that. A friend of ours down here in Florida had been talking about this new game that was coming out, and he had tried to get a local store in on the Kickstarter because he wanted the limited print run, which of course now we know is the black and silver cover. And they had forgotten to get involved, and he was irritated, but he was going to run the game for Free RPG Day. So Jen and I went to the store, and our friend Troy Tucker, who you hear us rib from time to time. Yeah, Troy is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And we sat down to play the game, and the store owner came over with a couple extra copies of the book and put them on the table in case anybody needed to reference them. And we were maybe 15 minutes into the game, and Jen turned to me and said, "Go buy this book. I think I'll run this game." Jen had never run a game before.
Wow.
I leapt from my seat, ran across the store, and threw my credit card across the counter. And so, while we didn't get started like some people did in the beta testing period, we just fell in love with the game when it was originally released for Free RPG Day, and have played it ever since. It has been Jen's go-to game ever since.
Now, what did you play before that?
For me, I started playing with Little Brown Books, and mostly AD&D and Call of Cthulhu when I was younger. Matter of fact, Sandy Peterson sold me my copy of Call of Cthulhu the first year Gen Con was in Milwaukee.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And I've been running it ever since. I'd run a lot of 1920s, and then I'd had a couple successful campaigns where I ran it. Well, now, of course, it's just modern day, but at the time they called it Cthulhu Now. And ran several campaigns there. And because Call of Cthulhu tends to be investigative, because it tends to be handout heavy, that really affected how I developed as someone that runs games. I now, as I will admit, have a handout fetish, and if I can find an excuse to put something in a player's hand, I'm going to put something in a player's hand. So that led me to also running games like Stargate SG-1, which was another perfect game to be giving out military reports and things of that nature. So I've been heavy on fantasy. I've played other games, Chill. I ran a Metamorphosis Alpha campaign that wrapped up, and I'm getting ready to start a new one. So I cross genres quite a bit, but investigative tends to start playing into anything I do.
And I've been on the receiving end of those handouts at least once, and it was awesome. It was really awesome.
We discussed how this tonight's show is going to be focusing on investigative games, and you brought it up, and we asked the question, but for someone who has no idea what an investigative game is, or how it plays, or the history of them, can you give us a few examples and a description of what makes that maybe different from what a lot of folks experience in games like Dungeon Crawl Classics, or Star Wars, or something like that?
Well, I think that investigative gaming is something that you can put into anything. It doesn't actually have to stand out on its own. In some ways, even the most basic dungeon crawl is investigative. You're going forward, you're learning the terrain, you're exploring catacombs, and so there's that sense of investigation there. I think in the context we're talking about, you are taking it a step further. Now you're not just going through these tunnels. Maybe if you're in a fantasy setting, you're finding fragments of maps, or you're finding old notes that are giving you hints of what is to come, or what happened and led up to you being where you are. For Call of Cthulhu, there's a lot of adversarial investigation. You're trying to stop cultists. You're trying to stop people who are trying to do horrible things. And so at that level, it's you against them, and you're trying to learn everything you can as you move forward, while, of course, trying to survive and stay sane. But in any game, I think that giving people that opportunity, as a judge, especially in a sandbox, you have a tendency to create a backstory, or you create a plot line, and there's a couple ways to approach it. You can just ram it down your players' throats and railroad them, for which they will not thank you, and they're not really going to retain it. Some people, that's their thing, but as a player, you're not really going to retain it that way. If you've got this great storyline, and it doesn't matter how quickly it proceeds, or if they ever learn all of the bits and pieces. For example, in a fantasy campaign, maybe you've got a kingdom that fell long ago, and there's all sorts of legends about it. You've got this great storyline, and it might affect the experience of the players more than it will their characters. Then maybe they're finding bits and pieces of legend. Maybe they're hearing bits of oral tradition in one place, finding old frescoes and mosaics in others, and they can piece it together. And you can do the same thing with adversarial investigation. And I find that as you are letting players piece things together, beautiful things can happen. You could have a minor NPC who was like, I don't know, Mook 5. You know, he was completely useless. You didn't bother naming him. He was just that guy you used. And players, once they start digging into things, really start digging into conspiracy. And maybe they look at everything you've put out and they start piecing things together in a whole new way. And as a judge, sometimes you're going to say, wow, that's a lot better than what I had. And you can embrace that. It's a great way to slyly co-opt ideas from your players. And they're going to feel great because they figured it out.
Yeah, that's one thing I like about running a game with an investigative element is, as a judge, you have to be on your toes. You can't just go through the motions, really, and have it be authentic.
No, I put a lot of prep into like my Call of Cthulhu games and things like that, so that I always hope to be over prepared so that players don't go, oh, I want to go here and check this out. Of course, that never works because the players will always think of someplace. At GaryCon this year, someone's like, we should go to the sewage treatment plant. And I was like, like, wow, that's... And he gave his reason. I was like, well, that's a really good idea. That never crossed my mind. When I ran my Cthulhu Now campaigns that I ran, that each went over a year, all of the characters for that, they were either members of various international intelligence agencies or law enforcement. And the idea was they worked under a United Nations umbrella. And so at the end of every session, I would be able to say, okay, guys, this is where we're wrapping. Where do you want to go? What information do you want? And they'd say, well, people have been disappearing here. I want to look at missing persons reports. I want to pull this guy's Interpol file. Let's see if any cars were stolen. And the players would give me this list of handouts that they wanted. And then I would be able to take that and say, okay, well, this is what's going on. And I could drop in information there. And then I would also go above and beyond. I created a band called Zushquan. They released 8 albums, and they got all of the lyrics and album art and everything else because I'm an overachiever like that. But that way you can, if you've got an ongoing campaign as opposed to a single adventure, you're going to get a better idea of what the players are going to be looking for and what they want, and you can start moving the informational reveals in that direction.
It really turns railroading on its head completely.
Yes.
I mean, they're railroading the GM.
Well,
which is kind of cool.
I think of it more of a collaborative effort.
Yeah.
Having studied improv, you never want to take someone's idea and just say no.
Right.
And so you give them something, they start building on it, and if you can take it and continue building on that, everybody is having a much better time than either a player or a judge who is being dragged forward, kicking and screaming, dragging their feet, because that's not how it's supposed to happen.
Mm-hmm. So, Bob, I have a question. Then you started talking a little bit about the investigative process, bits of maps laying around, so on and so forth, which brings up my question, which is, are clues absolutely necessary for an investigative game? Either way, how should a game master give clues to their players?
Clues, I think, are part of the discovery process. So that's kind of a broad term. I mean, if I'm searching for traps and I find a lever in a dungeon, that lever is a clue that there's a trap.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about providing players a method for discovery. How important things are, and I've had this conversation with other people. People kind of get hung up, well, what if there's a really important clue and nobody finds it and everything gets derailed? And my point is, well, then you've written an adventure that sucks. Because that's, that's one of the key things in, I think, as a matter of fact, how to write adventures that don't suck. Don't put the big boss of a dungeon behind a secret door that if you don't find the secret door, you can't complete the adventure.
Don't make it dependent on a roll.
Yeah, there should always be another way. So in an investigative game, you should always be able to get from the beginning to the end. The clues should be setting how prepared you are for when you get to the end. So, if at the beginning you think there's one person behind all this and you show up and there's an entire cult, well, you're not as well prepared, but then you've got that big reveal at the end as opposed to a build. So investigative storytelling gives you those opportunities for players to get to the end in a number of different ways and have a number of different experiences. I run the Mountain Monsters games. I run at GaryCon. They have never run the same way twice. I don't think they ever will. Everybody has a different experience playing through them, but they all start at the same place and they all end up at the same place.
I remember when I was in your session at GaryCon and you mentioned that I was the only character who had figured out, I won't say the secret. You know the one I'm talking about.
Say it.
No. I don't want to give it away because it's way too much fun. But, and I know how many times you've run that game, or I have a pretty good idea that you've run those sessions quite a few times. And it's just kind of amazing to me that was like a key thing. That was, wow, that was kind of the revelation that blew my mind. And I think blew the party's mind and got us to get off the couch and act. And it's just funny to me that, you could have gone through that so many times. And this character was the first one to discover this really central point to the whole mystery, really.
Right. And, for a con game, and like I said, I like to over-prepare. And for a con game, you run that game over and over and over again, and then someone eventually comes across something that nobody else has figured out. For me, that's a really great and fun moment. It's always been there, nobody's seen it. It doesn't derail the game. If you're running in a long-term campaign, things like that will eventually come out. So all of the prep work you put in for games like this, one way or another, people are going to come across it. So there's always a payoff as a judge when someone has that aha moment and you're like, yeah, someone put these pieces together and they got the same thing I was thinking of. And like I said, though, sometimes when people come up with a wholly different idea, you're like, wow, I've got to run with that because that is far too cool of an idea not to just embrace.
Yeah, and that goes against the accepted old wisdom of investigative games where, like you said earlier, the people will say, if the main clue is missed, then the whole adventure falls apart. The fact is, honestly, I can't remember a time where I've ever actually seen that happen, where people have missed it and it's been collapsed. I haven't seen that.
I'll go on record as openly saying, if you're running an investigative game and everything hinges on a single clue and the entire game derails because people didn't find the clue or get the information, there has been a massive failure either in writing or in running it. It's one way or the other. Because as the person running the game, in Call of Cthulhu, for example, you're a keeper, and as the keeper running the game, yes, you're not supposed to be pushing for the players, you're not supposed to be rooting for the players or against them, just like in any game. But I think you also have a responsibility to everybody at your table if you're going to run the game to make sure everyone's having fun. And various games, of course, have mechanics to try and get past failures like that. Call of Cthulhu has the idea roll. Trail of Cthulhu pretty much just eliminates searching for clues altogether and just says you're going to find them. There's different ways, but I think that as the person running the game, if things have gotten that extreme, I'm already looking and saying, okay, if I'm at this point, something's going wrong and I need to adapt and change before this becomes the major fallback, because that's the first sign something's gone very, very wrong. And it can. It takes a lot of time and practice to really get a feel for it for some people, and other people just fall right into it without a second thought.
Earlier you'd mentioned having an NPC, one of the mooks, become a key part of the adventure. And one thing I've noticed, and I'm just curious what your thoughts are on this. It seems to me, in my experience, in an investigative game, the non-player characters become much more critical to the story, and more so than the quote-unquote monster. It's almost like the monster is the MacGuffin, but the non-player characters are the way you get to the MacGuffin, I guess. And that's pretty different than most dungeon crawls that I've seen, at least the straightforward dungeon crawls, where you encounter a monster at every turn practically, and the only NPCs you care about are the henchmen that you can throw at the monster.
Well, yeah, there is something to be said for that. I mean, there's been investigative D&D adventures. The Assassin's Knot, for example. And yes, they can tend to be heavier on NPC interaction. They don't need to be. Mm-hmm. They certainly can be. I think that, at least for me, it is easier for me to run an NPC-heavy interaction game if I've written it as opposed to if I've read it. Right. Because I can sit down and I can look at these adventures and it's like, okay, well, here's all of the people at the party and here's the information they have. And unfortunately, at least for me, and other people have run games like that with great success. For me, I don't have enough to really grab on and go from. So investigative dealing with NPCs can be a great part of the process, but it's all kind of a personal feel. One of the things I've done recently with some of my Call of Cthulhu games has been more oral tradition. You're down south, there's the old bait shop, and there's a couple old guys sitting out there playing checkers, and you talk to them and they kind of tell you a tale. Versus digging through and finding something in a journal or an old book. And so you can do it either way. You can run an investigative game where they virtually don't speak to anybody. Maybe they're going from place to place trying to assemble fragments of a book, or they found a book and as they're going through it they're getting more information, or there's a magical MacGuffin and something is revealing more information as they go. So NPCs can be wonderful, but I don't think that anybody should shy away from running an investigative game thinking that that is going to be required.
Your point about the oral giving clues is interesting in light of a post-apocalyptic setting, because I think that's primarily how clues would be given in a Mutant Crawl Classics campaign.
I totally agree.
I'm guessing most people don't read, right? Or if they do read, they don't understand the language because it's thousands of years old.
Well, yeah, and I mean that's how our ancestors pass along information. That is probably how our descendants would eventually pass on information. And it's a great way to be able to introduce things quickly and in context. And I find that doing it via an NPC who tells them a story and then providing the players with a handout so they can pay attention and they don't have to be sitting there trying to jot down everything on just this long expose. I can play out the character, I can tell them the story, I can give them the handout, and because they've experienced the storytelling, because the story was really told to them as players, they will remember much more of it than just if they've read it and had to take notes.
Well, we started talking a little about you brought up Mutant Crawl Classics, and I've of the investigative games that I've seen on bookshelves and I've heard of, with Call of Cthulhu being the one I've heard the most about over the years. I don't think I've ever heard of a post-apocalyptic investigative game, and maybe there are some that exist. But what I've seen in most post-apocalypse type games is if the focus isn't on smashing monsters or smashing mutants, it's a lot about exploration, and that's one of my favorite parts about post-apocalypse games. Mm-hmm. Is you're discovering a new world that's built on the old world. So for a GM that wants to bring in or that investigative feel or an investigative campaign into this strange alien world, how can you blend the exploration with the investigation? Is it pretty much the same thing? You're just talking, different words, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, yes and no. I think that in a broad sense, it is the same thing. In a finer sense, obviously it's not. But I'll give you an example from my Metamorphosis Alpha campaign. I ran an adventure called Shepherd, Where Are Your Spoids? If you've ever seen those photos of sheep that have been lost in the wilderness for 5 years, they're just giant balls of fluff with no eyes. My idea was spoids started about the size of Dachshunds and were engineered to grow wool. And so on the level of the warden that my players were currently on, that was one of the major livestock choices was spoids. They provided meat, they provided clothing, all number of things. And then strange lights were seen in the evening sky, and all of the spoids vanished. And so they then needed to figure out where they were going to go. Well, the lights came from this way and they went that way. That was their first clue. And so they're like, well, let's backtrack. And as they backtracked it, they came across other villages, and they'd speak to the other villagers, and they too had seen strange lights, and spoids had gone missing. And so that was the basic conceit. Hey, where'd our sheep go? And as they followed that all the way along, they discovered that there is, I'd say, a very ancient reason why all of a sudden things had gone awry. AIs were starting to wake up that had slumbered for untold centuries, and they were reasserting their programming on what was supposed to be done. Hey, these flocks are supposed to be in this area. This is where we take care of them. This is how it's supposed to be. And they had to piece all of that together so that by the time they got there, by the time they saw this huge collection of livestock, They had a basic understanding of what was going on, and then they encountered what was truly responsible for it. So there was still this big reveal at the end, but they had to explore the area around them and piece things together. So I think that you can drop investigation as an additional layer on top of anything you want to do. If you want to do a hex crawl going from place to place, I'm trying to remember Benoit and Ernie Gygax put out a hex for when Tenkar's Tavern did a big hex project, and they did one that's freely available, and you can go and you can adventure in the hex, or you can start piecing things together. There's all these additional layers, and there's all this history. And that's what makes the difference. Mm-hmm. I can go someplace, and I can kill the monsters, and I can have a great time doing that. There's nothing wrong with doing that. I have a Wednesday night table of murder hobos. It's fantastic. But additionally, if I start adding those other layers, then while people are killing that party of orcs, they might start learning the history of the region. You're adding salt and pepper to the meal.
Yeah, it does require the GM to have gone into some deep background on the setting, really. You allow the players to run where they want to run, what level they want to run at. But in order to facilitate any investigative type structure, you kind of need to know what's happening behind the scenes.
At least in a general sense. You have to have a basic framework to hang things on. I've run handout light games. I hate to say handout light because I really do love my handouts. But I've run handout light games where in a fantasy setting, I've given the players a map. There's a couple locations on the map. The map represents a continent. I let them go. And then from game to game, I'm making the whole thing up on the fly, and I'm just piecing it together. If you want to go the handout route, then you need a lot more prep. You need to know a lot more about what's going on. And if you're going to go the thrift shop route and start picking up cool little weird things to put in your players' hands and have them turn over and over and stare at, then you need to know even more. Then you need to really know some strong specifics about what's going on.
I think some of those things arise organically, too. In my hybrid Mutant Call Classics campaign right now that I'm running, we started out with a teenage murder hobos in the post-apocalypse. And I'll be honest, for me, it started to wear thin as a judge. And so I had to kind of start creating a little bit of a background to what was happening there just to satisfy my own desires, I guess. And then my players started asking questions about things which ended up pointing me in the direction of going deeper in the background. So basically we were conspiring together on forming this background without knowing it, where I was working on things on one side and my players were giving me suggestions and you're kind of going that direction.
Right.
And it's wonderful when those two things meet at some point, when you can make them meet together. Then to me, it deepens the experience both for the judge and for the players. The players have something to look for to keep digging, and as a judge, you're able to create something that you feel satisfied with. It's not just your flat murder hobo grid paper.
I totally agree. And eventually, the other thing with an investigative game is even if the campaign is going to continue, eventually the players have to be able to come to the end of what they're currently investigating. They have to have that payoff, even if that payoff leads to something bigger. Or if it doesn't and they pick up and investigate something else, you've got to give players that release. They've got to get to an end somehow. Even if things go horribly, horribly wrong and they all die poorly, they need that opportunity to get that resolution.
Well, and that brings up a question that I have about scope. In a post-apocalyptic setting, it can be very broad. I think back to the original first edition Gamma World, and I think back to the Legion of Gold module, which is a kind of a wide-ranging hex crawl with a few mini adventures sprinkled in between. And when I was a kid, I always thought, well, what's beyond the borders? What's off the map? What else is there out there? And the thing is, with an investigative game, you can almost get lost in too big of a world. I've been in Call of Cthulhu adventures where two of them I can think right off the top of my head that took place in one room, literally in one room. And these were con games, but we went for 4 hours in one room and it never got boring.
Do you play Novus by any chance?
I don't.
Okay. I was wondering because they've run a couple games that have taken place in one room. And something like that can be really good, or it can turn into bug in a box where you're sort of helpless. Scope is something that I think a judge needs to look at and address. If you look back historically, through the majority of humankind's history, people never went probably more than 50 miles from where they were born.
Yeah.
And, in a post-apocalypse setting, there's certainly, you can have a great big world for them to explore, or you can give them lots of options within a smaller area. Because at the end of the day, the only difference between a party exploring something 100 miles away and 10 miles away is if they're going 100 miles away, they say they find a Jeep and they drive, and it's still pretty much hand-waved other than maybe an encounter or two, and then they arrive.
Right. I mean, in some ways, especially in a post-apocalypse game, the scope is the same as it would be on a regular Earth because it's the same size. So it's just, are you thinking, Forrest, that like it's just the idea that the scope of what's unexplored out there, it needs to be understood first, and just the assumption that someone on Earth would, if you're running an Earth-based investigative game, that they know where everything is, they're not interested by it?
I guess maybe I should clarify. So when I think of post-apocalypse, I think of typically in my mind, I'm thinking of a large area that's very sparsely populated.
Gotcha.
When I think of an investigative game, I'm thinking of, there's a lot of little clues. It's like I'm looking at my writing desk right now and I'm seeing these little Post-it notes. I'm seeing, the bottle of ginger beer I'm drinking. I see my phone there, and there are all these clues that could tell you a whole lot about me and my situation or whatever, peripheral things are happening in my life just by these objects here. But in the post-apocalypse, those objects are strewn, few and far between. They may have been destroyed utterly. And there's a lot of space in between them. And Bob, you mentioned hand waving. Yeah, I don't know if that's a feature or a bug.
Well, I think it's a matter of perspective. I mean, as a modern day person living in the United States, I can get into my car and I can drive to Gen Con, and I'm there in less than 24 hours. Mm-hmm. So traveling across the country to find a piece of information or go to a game, that's all totally within the realm of possibility. If I had to do it on foot, it would never happen. I think not only scale, but perspective of scale needs to be looked at. Yes, the post-apocalyptic wasteland is a huge area and it is sparsely populated, but to someone whose only method of travel is horseback or foot, the world is a lot bigger. And so those areas that we consider small are still very large. I mean, think about what you can put in a 10 mile by 10 mile square.
Yeah.
Or 10 by 10 hex or whatever you want to use. And that's a big area right off the bat. I can run something in that area 10 miles. I could have several tribes that are still small. They don't have to be 1,000 people each. They might only be 30 people each. So it's still sparsely populated, but I don't have to create this additional barrier and you have to travel for a week and a half to get there.
Right.
I can use things like that when it matters to me and to the experience I'm trying to give the players.
I don't want to just go with the stereotype that an investigative story has to happen in an urban setting, but I think if I was running a post-apocalyptic game, Mutant Core Classics or something similar, if I really wanted the players to explore a smaller area, village, post-apocalyptic city, New Vegas, something like that, the choice of an investigative game would maybe help pin the characters down in that area and explore some of the nuance rather than getting maybe swallowed up by going out into the vast.
You could certainly use it as a method to keep people interested in one location. Conversely, you could also use it to keep them moving. If the investigation that you want to play out for your game is what was the great disaster, what was it, what caused it, then you have a very wide scope. Then you're going to have a lot of moving around and discovering things. And maybe that's the root of your game that is going to be the overarching investigation with other things going on. If you want them to say, hey, so the shaman of our tribe was just killed last night, who did it? Then it's just their village. If someone has been raiding your village, finding out who it is and what they want and who they are, you can just sort of go from very local to kind of banding out further and further.
I think also if you have the luxury of having a campaign, so this won't work in a con setting, But in a campaign, you can vary the scope kind of like an accordion, that you expand it and contract it. Where if, let's say you're investigating what the Great Disaster is, of course, that's a big thing. And you're going to have to go to a lot of different places to find clues. But when you get to a certain place, you can ratchet down the scope, or I guess increase the level of granularity to where, there may be a building in a city that has the clues you're looking for. And that would require some role playing on that kind of, personal level, that very intimate level with the clues that are around you. And there's your opportunity for handouts, Bob, all you want.
Oh, well, certainly.
And then once they get that clue, they can expand the accordion again, and you have them travel. You may salt in some random encounters and whatnot. You may even have a story arc in between, places where the characters are getting clues that allows them to kind of explore the wider world and get to the whole wow factor, the awe-inspiring apocalypse, to be able to take that in.
And I think that if your grand investigation, if your main plan is to have them find out what caused the Great Disaster, you don't ever have to tell the players that.
Yep.
You don't have to tell them that at all. You might run 2 sessions that are investigative, where they're digging into something strange that's happened, and then there might be 4 or 5 more traditional kind of hex crawl or dungeon crawl style games. As long as you keep dropping hints here and there as they're finding things, they're going to piece them together, and then everything is part of that big investigation. It doesn't have to be investigation all the time.
Right. Well, and back to one of the earlier points in the show, let's say that the players go and they investigate this area. They discover, oh, hey, it looks like it was a plague that wiped everybody out. Well, maybe that was true if you were, say, in Cleveland, around Cleveland clinics where they're doing research on, strange viruses, or the CDC headquarters or something. But maybe, down in Florida, it might be because of Cape Canaveral, a spaceship blew up and caused havoc. They may think they know what caused the Great Disaster when in fact they only know a subset of what happened.
Exactly. And if they think they know what caused it, and then they later discover that was actually just a small facet that actually caused something else to happen, let them find that out 6 months later, and they're going to sit back and have a whole new appreciation for everything that you've been doing campaign-wise behind the scenes.
And that's one of those sessions where everybody sits back in their chair and stares at each other and goes, whoa.
Yeah.
Which is a good feeling.
It is.
Let's see, I had one more question. Then, we had talked about layers, and I don't know if the two of you have seen Pelgrane Press's Conspiramid. Have you ever seen the Conspiramid?
I have indeed seen it.
Okay, so have you seen that, James?
I have not seen it. No,
okay.
I'm not sure what it is.
It's for a game called Night's Black Agents, which we won't get into too much detail.
I heard of that.
Yeah, that's the vampire-ish game. And the Conspiramid basically is a way to structure the levels of conspiracy behind what's happening. So you might start off, running into a guy on the street who's let's say it's a beggar, right? But then you find out that the beggar is actually part of a larger thieves group, right? But behind the thieves group is a higher level of organized crime. But behind that are some politicians who are, manipulating things on a bigger level. And behind that, you have some kind of evil entity, vampire in the case of Night's Black Agents, who's actually running the show. And then even there you would have levels of different vampires. And I've wondered, and I really need to sit down and put pen to paper and kind of map this out for myself in my own campaign, but how could archaic alignments play into that, into those levels of conspiracy? We could probably take hours going over this, but I don't want to. I don't think you guys want to either, but I'm just wondering, what possibilities are there?
I think there's great possibility there. I mean, the Conspiramid itself it's a nice structural tool. If you're trying to create a grand conspiracy, it is certainly a good way to do it. And you can always add extra steps and make things broader. So that said, if you want to look at it in terms of the archaic alignment, and we'll do it on a small scale first. In your village, you've got the village headman. He's going to be on rank 2. So at the top rank, we've got a mutant warlord who controls a number of villages throughout the area, but he does it quietly. He does that behind the scenes. And his archaic alignment is different, and he is using coercion or threats or any number of things to then force other groups to behave the way he wants. So as a PC, well, I'm a tribe of Cog, and we do things a certain way, and all of a sudden, things are happening that seem a little bit off.
Right.
So I'm at the bottom. I'm technically outside this pyramid. I don't know what's going on, and we've got two other steps between. So we've got the headsman who runs our village in rank 2, and then we have the council of elders. There's 5 of them, and they make up the 3rd rank. And then there are the various family heads. They make up the 4th rank, and then I'm the mushroom kept in the dark, being fed manure. And so my father is telling me, well, you need to go out and do this. And that strikes me as strange. And so I can look into that. I can look into, well, why is my father asking me to do this? And then that could lead me to any one of the village elders. And I could look into that. And that would take me to the headsman or maybe the shaman of the village. You know, the two of the head shaman making the other half of the 2nd tier. And I can look into that, and then that leads to this revelation that, well, the reason that we're acting on the sly like we say we don't is because there's this outside force. It's sort of like, as an American, we like to think that we don't carry out secret bombing raids in Cambodia. But we did carry out secret bombing raids in Cambodia. And so you follow that chain up, and then... So now I follow this pyramid up and I discover there's this warlord. Well, that warlord could be the end of things, or he could be the bottom of another conspiramid going up.
I just think it becomes particularly rich if you're, tribe of the Cog, and for some reason, you get to this warlord and you realize, you know what? He's right. We've been wrong this whole time. And to me, that just adds a level of role playing, ROLE playing, that is really immersive. I mean, incredibly immersive for the player.
Always have a sympathetic villain. Always have someone behind the scenes that makes sense. The whole concept of, well, I'm a super scientist who wants to blow up the planet makes a lot less sense in light of cartoons that have said, well, of course I want to save the planet because this is where I keep my stuff.
Right.
Yeah, if you've got someone that your players can relate to, even if they're like, you're wrong, but I can see your point of view, you're in a great shape. And some of the players might agree with that point of view, and thus their characters might follow that route. It's all about giving people opportunities. A villain doesn't necessarily have to be overcome. Sometimes they can be embraced.
Yes. Yeah, totally agree. So with these conspiramids, the implication of any kind of conspiracy is that there are laws in place, that there's some kind of agreed upon order of things that is being subverted by this conspiracy, right? You have to set one against the other.
Right.
But I'm wondering, in a post-apocalyptic environment, rarely outside of Thundar wielding his sun sword, do you have any semblance of law? That there's just not enough energy to enforce it, right? Except on a very small scale. So I'm wondering, is that a plus or a minus in post-apocalyptic investigative game that you do not necessarily, you may have some kind of law enforcement, but you don't have like the structure that we have in our civilization today.
Right, yeah, everything is certainly much more local. Although, again, if you have petty warlords, they might be spreading further. But yeah, it's not like you're going to be able to go outside and run into the watch,
right,
and have them take your side. I think that depending on your players, that can be a great asset or it can be a stumbling block. And for a campaign, you need to know your players and mold things accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
I think that not having an overarching legal system that's holding everything in place gives them a lot more flexibility. They can more freely pry into places where they might not normally pry because there isn't anybody that's going to tell them no. On the other hand, that also gives players a chance to truly run amok and just burn things to the ground. You want to know your players and what sort of play styles they enjoy so you can plan accordingly. Because it's not about taking players that like to burn everything to the ground and telling them no. Mm-hmm. It's about, if you've got players like that, working within that framework and saying, okay, well, they're going to murder hobo their way across the world, then probably not going to do a whole lot of oral tradition storytelling to reveal clues because they're going to stab people in the face. But if they start finding old items from before the Great Disaster, strange metal plates with inscriptions on them, which are certainly of value, so they're going to steal them. They might even stab people in the face for them. You've now put things in their hand and they're going to piece things together. So just know your players, know how they tend to advance forward, and give them the opportunity to learn as they're doing it.
And let them keep their agency. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, Bob, the main investigative game that people think of is Call of Cthulhu, or maybe Trail of Cthulhu. The investigation is almost always anyway, intertwined with the element of horror. And in those games, it's difficult to have one without the other. And I'll say that is one of the thrills that I get out of those games, not necessarily the horror itself, but the revelation at the end, or the uncovering of something awe-inspiring or maybe horrible. How do you see that fitting in with a post-apocalyptic game? Is horror... I don't know that it's necessary, but what about that reveal?
I don't think it's necessary. It is certainly something that I greatly enjoy. I'm with you on that. I like horror. I like monsters at the end of my investigation, or evil cultists. I like those things, but I think that you can tell amazing stories even in a more mundane world. Although, in the case of Mutant Crawl Classics, it's not a mundane world. Mm-hmm. But in an investigative game set in today's world without monsters, you can still tell great stories. It's just all about that structure. You need that reveal at the end, whether it's the classic, the butler did it, and then Great Cthulhu rose and began his reign on Earth. Anything in between. It's all about the reveal. It's about the structure as opposed to the content.
It seems to me like part of it is revealing your place in the cosmos, especially with Call of Cthulhu. But I also think with Mutant Crawl Classics, when I think of the literature on which it's based, people learn something about their place in the cosmos and how small they are really, and how big everything else is.
Well, that kind of depends. Mm-hmm. I mean... Yes, for example, if you were to look at Jack Kirby's Commandy, when he emerges from the bunker, certainly he's learning kind of his place in the world, and the world is very different from what he expected. Uh-huh. And so on that front, that goes hand in hand. If you look at something like Hyro's Journey, it's really not so much a revelation of his place in the world so much as there are dark things out there. There are things that lurk at the edges of civilization, and they have their own ideas of what civilization is.
Right.
So, I mean, yes, Cosmic Horror is all about you are petty and insignificant, and the things that walked the world before us dwarf you. But investigation overall can be, I think, as big or small in scope as you want.
Great. Good. James, any more questions?
Well, I guess for someone who hasn't played much investigative role-playing and wanted to give it a shot, would you recommend they inject it into their existing games that they have going, or should they guide themselves along with maybe a system more designed for that type of gaming in general?
Well, that's a little tougher. I mean, there's systems that are certainly meant to make investigation a bit easier, like Call of Cthulhu does. But there's also something to be said for go with what you know. If you have never run a system other than Dungeon Crawl Classics, for example, then look at ways to incorporate it from your comfort zone first. You don't want to have to try and juggle learning a new type of system as well as a new type of adventure to write, create, or run at the same time. I think that could get a little overwhelming. And if things go off the rails, you've got too many variables. Is it because I don't know the rule system? Is it because the players don't like the rule system? Am I not giving enough clues? So stick with what you know, or conversely speaking, rather than immediately starting to run something investigative, plan some con games. Mm-hmm. Find someone that runs. Call of Cthulhu is my favorite. It is the first role-playing game that Jen ever played. Find someone that runs a game like that and just play a couple sessions. See what you think. You might be thinking you want to run an investigative game, and then you sit down and play a few, and it might not be your bag. So then you've saved yourself a lot of effort. I like it. It doesn't have to be for everybody.
Well said.
There is no wrong fun.
No, except for Tina Turner.
That is just not my fun.
Or Tweaky.
Oh, yeah, Tweak.
Beady, beady, beady,
Tweak.
beady.
Oh, no, make it stop.
Beady, beady, beep.
I saw that in the theater.
Oh, gee. This is getting worse.
I paid money to see that.
I'm sorry. Let's move on to the mutagenesis, shall we?
Let's.
Welcome to the Mutagenesis. This is where we take something from media or another game system, take a stab at converting them for Mutant Crawl Classics role-playing game use. James, what do you have for Mutagenesis this week?
I've been drinking a lot of coffee at work lately, and I suffer from this terrible affliction that there is a Starbucks literally 80 feet from where my desk is. I just need to go on one set of steps. In my office building, I'm only on the second floor, and there's a Starbucks in my building. So for tonight's Mutagenesis, I have the Living Latte. So living lattes are the result of neutron bombs going off in close proximity to everyone's favorite coffee shop. The intense radiation steams the milk to a froth level that allows nearly instant spawning of new life to form from the foam. Not only new life, but new intelligent life. Typically, this does not bode well for pure strain humans in the vicinity of living latte enclaves. These cups of joe remember the subjugation of their kind over the years and are ready to throw down. Although they can be found in more of a puddle form, 6 to 8 gallons for a tallish, 12 to 20 for a grandiose, and 20 plus gallons for a venterific. Given enough time, they will create reinforced titanium travel mugs that serve as armor. Most coffee shops in the world before the Great Disaster had automated servers, so these reinforced titanium travel mugs have hover treads that let living lattes move about, although at a rather slow speed. So I have some stats, and I guess we can put those in the show notes. I'll toss them at my blog, too, at some point. But living lattes essentially come in 3 forms: tallish, grandiose, and venterific. And each form has a different initiative. The smaller they are, the less dangerous. You can find them in a low AC puddle. I kind of sort of based them on slimes at first. They have, a D8 hit points, if they're the small ones, 3D8, and they're larger. I like when they have the reinforced titanium travel mug, they're a little slower, but they have an AC of like 16, 18, or 20, depending on size. Now, when they're attacking you, and they will attack you, they can essentially slosh themselves at you for variable damage. And if they want their, D4 damage at the smaller size, they can make it foamy and take 1d3 damage themselves to increase their splash attack with extra foam, increasing the damage by plus 2d. So essentially, if a grandiose, which is a medium if you don't know, a grandiose living latte would do 1d6 damage against a target typically, but they can make it foamy, take a d3 of damage themselves, and increase that d6 to a d8. So this is essentially the living latte discarding some more of itself to cause damage. Now, living lattes can have special flavors or syrups that are incorporated into their DNA. So I have a little chart here. You roll a D5. If you roll a 1, you get an extra shot, which is an extra attack die. Number 2 is an extra hot, so plus 2 bonus to attack because of just sheer hotness. On a 3, it's a mochaccino, which is full of rich chocolate, and the mochaccino living latte is especially dangerous to manimals because they shouldn't be eating chocolate, right? All attacks against manimals are made an additional plus 1d. Number 4 is a soy milky. This living latte is easy on the digestive tract of its targets. It's nowhere near as foamy and cannot make it foamy to increase damage. If you do have to encounter a living latte, this is the one to encounter. And finally is the macchiato. That's a D-O. This living latte is a master of macchiato, a coffee shop-based martial art. The macchiato master can perform amazing throwing attacks against any targets that have moved into melee range. On the macchiato master's turn, all targets engaged in melee must make a DC 12, 14, or 16, depending on, if it's tallish, grandiose, or venterific, reflex save, or get thrown 10 feet and knocked prone. So if you want a martial arts wielding titanium travel mug floating living macchiato in your game, you know where to find it.
Wow. How do you top that?
Wow.
I give up. That was incredible. That was absolutely incredible, James.
Well, thank you.
Talk about horror in the post-apocalypse. I mean, it doesn't get much more horrific than that.
And that would so easily fit into any crawling under a broken moon themed game.
Oh, yes. definitely.
Shall I go next?
Yes, please.
Go ahead, Bob.
Since you guys gave me the heads up, hey, we're going to do this. Do you want to take part? About an hour ago when we started recording. I immediately go back to the first post-apocalyptic movie I ever saw, which was 1977's Damnation Alley.
Oh, yeah.
Based on the Roger Zelazny story. Mm-hmm. And Forrest, if you're Oyag, you can probably guess what in that movie gave me nightmares when I was younger. I'd look down at the shag carpet in my bedroom at night, and it would seem to be seething and moving. So, of course, when it comes to post-apocalyptic horrible creatures, the killer cockroaches from Damnation Alley is immediately what springs to my mind. I'll write up stats for this. I'll send them to you, but I'm pretty sure I can do this on the fly. Let's see. It is obviously a swarm-based creature. The Florida palmetto bug is one of the fastest land-moving insects in the world, so we'll give it a high in it, maybe like a 5 in it and a matching movement of 50.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
They're fast.
Very fast.
They are fast. They can run more than 5 feet in a second, so 50, I think, fits. Like a swarms, they would do a small amount of damage with their initial bite. So give them a +1 melee attack. They do a single point of damage. They're cockroaches. Palmetto bugs are strangely resilient. You can step on one and it'll run away. So I'd say an AC of 10 to 11, maybe on the 11 side. And for the swarm, for its hit dice and hit points, I think that would be one of its special abilities. I think that it would start like it did in the movie, small. Start with like 2d8. And then for every, we'll say, 3 hit points it does. So every 3 rounds, word is getting out, and more of them are swarming. Because that's what happened in the movie. The guy, they found all these skeletons, and then there was just one, and it bit somebody, and then there was more, and there was more, and then he was gone. So for every 3 hit points of damage the swarm does, it adds another hit die. So it would go from like 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, as it's getting bigger and bigger because, let's face it, when you see one cockroach, there's a billion others. And it gives you that tidal wave effect of them just swarming out of the walls. Now, for 0 levels, that's really dangerous. For 1st and 2nd level, it's not yet. I think we give them another special ability because they are literally devouring the flesh off your bones. And if you're using something like this, you want to be able to be describing that as it goes along. So just rolling over the body because, the person was only knocked out or something like that is a little less likely. So I think then if you are killed by a swarm of killer cockroaches, if you have to make a luck check to be recovered, is penalized by the number of hit dice that the swarm achieved.
Ooh, that's great.
That is good.
Because the more of them they are, the less likely there's going to be anything left but boots and bones.
Love it.
I like it.
So
that's fantastic.
Since they're swarm, obviously, half damage from non-area attacks. Maybe they're cockroaches, so maybe vulnerable to fire and resistant to radiation. So I'll give you a stat block on those. You can post that too. I'll write those.
You stat those up. I'm using them in my campaign.
That's fantastic.
Those are going right after my players.
It'll ruin their day.
That is great stuff. All right, well, I'll go ahead and go. I wish I had something funny, but I just don't tonight. I'm all out of humor. One thing I have learned, really, since I was a kid, because you've heard my background, we were in fear of nuclear war all the time as a kid. But one thing I found in all of this is that, contrary to the science fantasy canon, radiation itself does not actually glow, okay? So if you're coming on a city that's been nuked and is full of radiation, you won't see anything. Nuclear radiation causes certain substances to glow, but radiation is invisible. It's the invisible killer.
Yes, it is.
How do you ensure that the next artifact or rock or body that you pick up isn't throbbing with gamma rays? You really don't. You don't know. If you've seen pictures of Chernobyl, it looks like, people left in the middle of dinner and it's in decay and so on, but there's nothing glowing there, right? So the answer to being able to know whether things are glowing or whether they're radioactive or not is by using RIDEC, RIDEK, which stands for Radiation Intensity Detecting Escherichia coli. That's RIDEC, sorry. And what that is your friendly neighborhood E. coli that live in your intestine have been genetically manipulated by the ancient ones to glow in the presence of radiation. So these really handy microbial critters would come in all kinds of containers, probably in some kind of a spray form that you can spray onto a suspect object or corpse or whatever it is that you're looking at, artifact. It'll take 1 to 3 minutes for the Riddick to glow in the presence of radiation, and the glow will last for about D12 minutes. Beings holding, carrying, or wearing items that radiate strongly are at a disadvantage in combat if they've been sprayed with Riddick, because they're more easily targeted. So in daylight conditions, those who have been sprayed with Riddick who are possessing these radiated items would suffer a -1 penalty to their armor class. And at night, if fighting in total darkness, others would suffer no disadvantage when trying to hit them. And of course, Riddick has to be used on the radioactive items to have the people be revealed. The people have to be holding radioactive items to have this glowing effect on them. And how much of that is up to the discretion of the judge. And that's what I've got is Riddick, the radiation intensity detecting Escherichia coli. Say that 5 times fast.
You know, since that's a biological, once MCC releases and judges have the rule sets in their hands, that might be fun to do instead as a mutation.
Yeah?
Something that you have internally. I can just imagine, okay, well, how do we know if it's radioactive or not? Ask Rocky. How's Rocky know? And we'll be genteel, and he will evacuate on it by vomiting. But
I like that it's both. It can be an advantage and a disadvantage depending on how you're using it. If you're trying to find radiation, you have that item or Rocky that can just barf it on you. However you want to have it, you have it in a way that it's assisting your group. But then again, there's a tactical use for it as well. If you're in combat and you want to hose someone down, there you go. You make it easier to hit them. Yep,
multifunctional. That's what we like.
So wait, so it was Riddick. So radioactively intense
radiation and
dispersing.
There you go.
I'm thinking of the retching.
Oh boy, yeah.
Rapidly integrated dispersal of
ejection.
Yes. Yeah, we'll stop there.
Yeah.
There's no world in which that acronym ends well.
No.
So we'll just stop
anything
there.
I can think of with the letter C is probably not appropriate. So, all right. That'll do it for mutagenesis then. Thank you, gentlemen.
You bet.
Thank you. All right, so we'll start our closing with some announcements. So Gen Con 50 is August 17th to 20th in Indianapolis, and there's going to be a lot of DCC and a lot of MCC, and it should make for a crazy and insane 4 days in gaming, or more if you go early like we do, and it's 5 or 6 days of gaming. Gamehole Con event registration is open. There will be several sessions of Crawling Under a Broken Moon being run, and we presume there'll be several more of Mutant Crawl Classic sessions as well. Judge Forrest will be running 2 sessions of his Killer of Giants adventure, so go to GameholeCon.com for information. Tara Frank shared with us a heads up for a new zine called No Place Like Home, which is an 8-page zine, 2 folded sheets, and it's an adventure set in an abandoned post-apocalyptic kids' hideout overrun with sentient filth and trash. So this is actually a charity release that Death Machine Press is putting out in collaboration with another publisher. And this time, Shane Ward of 3 Toadstools Publishing is granting permission to use a fun side view map. All proceeds for this publication will go to benefit Youth Without Shelter, a Toronto-based organization that helps house and empower homeless youth, which you can find at www.yws.on.ca. And the zine is free with donation. Suggested donation is $5 US, but donations of any size are welcome. And please include a shipping address when donating to get your hands on this. We'll have a link in the show notes to a PayPal address of where you'd go for that.
And you can never have too many zines.
Exactly.
Never, ever, ever have enough zines.
All right. If you'd like to contact us, you can contact us via Twitter at Glowburn or by email at glowburnpodcast@gmail.com. And you can always come to the Glowburn community on Google+, where we have an active community. James, how can we contact you?
You can find me at I Live for Crits, or you can go to my blog, which is just livingforcrits.com, and it's the number 4.
Okay, and you can find me on Twitter at Forrest Aguirre. That's 2 R's in each name, FORRESTAGUIRRE, just like it's pronounced. And you can find me on the interwebs at https://forrestaguirre.blogspot.com. And Bob, how do we get a hold of you?
The easiest way is probably via Facebook or Google+, but you can yell or rant at me on Twitter at Seronimus, that is CERONOMUS. You can contact me via the Sanctum Secorum podcast at thehub@sanctum.media. If you say my name 3 times on social media, I just appear, so...
This is true.
Unless it's Ello. I do not appear on Ello, but I will pop up on Google Plus and Facebook at the drop of a hat.
All right. Well, Bob, thanks for being with us tonight. We really appreciate it. This has been great.
You bet. This was a lot of fun.
All right. Actually, you're the first person we're going to mention in our special thanks and credits, so here we go. Ooh. We'd like to thank our shaman of intros, outros, and bumpers, Bob the Voice Brinkman, our patron AI of audio visual engineering, Hector the Missile Cruz, to whom we apologize in advance, and our creative advisors, who is our Google Plus community, currently 229 strong. Intro and outro song is brought to you by the group Chronox. The album name is Voyager, and the song is Juno, and that is available on the freemusicarchive.org. Closing, I'd just like to say, burn them if you got them. And James, do you have anything?
Yeah, I still can't believe I signed up to run 4 9 a.m. games at Gen Con.
Oh.
Get it done early, man. Get it done early.
Take a nap.
I run 8 o'clock games at GaryCon.
Yes, you do. 8 o'clock horror games.
Yeah. Well, because if you're going to die horribly, it's because I'm not awake yet.
That's the horror. The horror is 8 a.m.
All right. Once again, thank you, Bob, and appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Absolutely my pleasure.
Ariel, Ookla, ride!
Blood of your enemy makes you stronger.
This has been a Hectophonic production.
The gun is good. The gun is